Brian Lewis was born in Duplin County, specifically in Kenansville, North Carolina. They moved a lot when he was growing up. Political issues, abortion, gay rights, and other topics were discussed during his childhood. As a child, Brian came from a poor family. They lived in public housing, but their church helped them get through the hard times. Brian used to be a student government president in 5th grade. He is personally interested in journalism, which is why he was a part of the student newspaper when he was in college. Brian covered everything about the student government and the UNC system. He took up political science as his college major and had a master's degree in public affairs with a concentration in public policy. He also spent a lot of time in the communications department. How did Brian switch from journalism to public affairs? What can he suggest for those who are interested in becoming a lobbyist? How was his experience in the world of public affairs? Join us as we listen to Brian Lewis' story in this Next State Lobbying Heroes episode.
Hey, Brian. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Deepak, thanks for having me.
Let's get started with the rapid fire set of questions. Could you tell us what is the one myth or misconception about lobbying?
I think that the conception out there among the public especially is that lobbyists are calling all the shots, that we are in the back room telling legislators what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And that is the furthest from the truth. The fact of the matter is, it's like those graphics you see, Deepak, on Twitter, what your mom thinks lobbying is, what you think lobbying is, what the public is. And, TV and books have not done us any favors. A lot of what I do every single day at the General Assembly is simply having conversations with legislators, giving them the pros and the cons, asking, waiting, hoping, helping. But any lobbyist that goes into a legislator's office and just says, "This is what I want, Mr. Speaker," I don't care who they are, they will be shown the door and they will never be in that office again. So, are there lobbyists out there that are very well connected, that have powerful PACs? Yes, there are. But I would hazard this guess, Deepak, that if you lined up all 900 lobbyists at the General Assembly, from the most powerful to the ones that are down there on the lost causes, they could all point to miserable failures that they've had to work through working at the General Assembly.
What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
I would be a shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. If I was only faster, could hit better, was a better athlete. I grew up loving baseball. I played baseball all my life. I've played adult baseball. I like to pretend on Sunday afternoons that I am, when I suit up, that I am a professional baseball player, but I love athletics. I love baseball. If I wasn't doing that's what I would do.
What is your favorite destination spot?
Carolina Beach, North Carolina, on a day where there is light 5-mile-an-hour wind moving offshore and the waves are breaking at about 2 to 3 feet at Tower 6 at Carolina Beach. That is my favorite destination. I go there, my blood pressure drops. I just feel so good being at the beach. I love the water, Deepak.
Yeah, that's awfully specific. Thank you for that. What is your favorite book or hobby?
My favorite book or hobby, I would think my favorite hobby, I'll start with that, is surfing. I love the water. I love being in the water. I try to surf all year round. I have wetsuits and just enjoy being in the water. It is the one thing that I do, Deepak, where I feel I can't take my mobile phone out into the water. I feel like when I am in the water and I'm surfing, I feel somehow I'm not, the most spiritual person in the world, but I do feel this connection with nature and I feel physically exhausted. I just love surfing. It is my true love and my favorite hobby to do. My favorite book would have to be A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, or just really just about anything by John Irving, who wrote The World According to Garp, The Cider House Rules. I love that book. I cherish that book. It is the one book I would take with me if my house caught on fire.
What three skills you think are essential for someone to be a good lobbyist?
To be a good listener. Listening is the number one thing I do. People say I talk for a living. That's kind of the thing. He's a lobbyist. He talks for a living. Not true. While I do communicate a lot, the one thing I would say is listening to legislators, listening to my clients, and trying to find where that sweet spot is. Number two would be communication, talking, conveying a message. Number three would be patience. And this is something that I've probably had to work on the most. I care so much about the issues that I'm working on, Deepak. When firefighters come to me and they say they're dying of cancer at a higher rate than smokers, I want to fix that yesterday. And learning to be patient with a General Assembly that doesn't feel that sense of urgency that I feel personally about that. I tend to get wrapped up in my clients on a very personal level. So patience would be the third thing.
Who was the most famous person you met?
I met President Obama in 2000, in the late 2000s. He came to Raleigh. I can't say that President Obama remembers Brian Lewis, but I did get to shake his hand. That was an experience. I'd say President Obama is probably the most famous man on the planet right now.
Can you tell us what inspires or motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
I have a strong sense of right and wrong. I grew up this way. These are values that were instilled in me. I do believe whether you are a client that is on a budget and you are here at New Frame, or you are a client that's not on a budget, I treat all of these issues equally. I would say that I believe in what our clients are doing. It motivates me every morning. I go to bed thinking about my clients. I read the newspaper before I go to bed. Sometimes I don't go to bed until after midnight. So I get the insider because I want to know what's going on in North Carolina politics. I have a strong sense of urgency for every single client that has an issue that we're working on. And every single day, I don't think about the invoices. I don't think about what they're paying. I think this is their issue. I want to fix that, whether it's better funding, whether it's a good policy they want passed, or if it's a bad policy that they need stopped.
With that, let's jump into your past. Can you tell us, where did you grow up and how was your childhood like? And were you interested in any politics back then?
Yeah, so I was born in Duplin County, Kenansville, North Carolina, which is about an hour and a half east of here. It's an agricultural community. I lived there into elementary school, and my mom and dad, I have a little sister. My father had just gotten back from the Vietnam War, and we didn't know a lot about PTSD. We didn't know a lot about substance abuse, but my father suffered from both of those. And my mother, with the help of my father's family, moved me and my sister up to Virginia Beach. And we lived in Virginia Beach for about 7 years before returning back to North Carolina. So I consider myself the product of a single mom. Although I've had, my father was in my life for the first 7 or 8 years, and then I had a stepfather. My mother, I grew up in a very evangelical home, Deepak. My mother worked at the 700 Club, which is the Christian Broadcasting Network. We went to a church called Rock Church. It was a very Pentecostal-based church. And it really instilled in me, Deepak, that was my first kind of injection into politics, because we were a very politically active church. My church in 1980 founded Washington for Jesus. So I remember going to DC on a bus that our church chartered. I was 9 years old. And we were there to support the election of Ronald Reagan, although I don't think that was official, because we're a church at the time. We're a church, still are. And so I grew up around a lot of political talk around some of the wedge issues, abortion, gay rights. Some of those things were starting to come into place in the early 1980s. We also had, it was kind of ironic, even though we had this very conservative-based church that was very politically active, we were also very social justice-minded. My mom, single mom, she worked 3 jobs. We were poor. We lived in public housing. This church did take care of us. They had a sense of, we had a food bank, we had financial assistance. So while we talked a lot about these, what we would call Republican issues proactively, we also had this strong sense of helping each other and getting to the root of poverty. So I had a weird kind of upbringing, and it's probably has a lot to do with who I am today, because I have this kind of weird way of doing politics today. But grew up in Virginia Beach, was very active in our church, played baseball for the church. And we then moved to North Carolina when I was in high school, and we moved around a lot. So my mom got remarried, and we went from public housing to living in a series of trailer parks throughout. We moved to Apex, we moved to Garner, we moved to Wendell, we lived in Knightdale, and we lived in Raleigh. So for me, a lot of that, where I come from geographically, where I come from religiously, the way I see families and some of the pressures that are on families, especially when it comes to, children of incarcerated parents. My father went on to make a lot of mistakes in his life. He died last year. He made a lot of mistakes in his 30s and 40s. Spent a lot of time in North Carolina's correctional system. It really did shape this weird way that I see the world.
And so in high school, were you actively involved in any debates or student body organizations?
So in the 5th grade, I ran for student government president, and I won in Newtown Road Elementary School in Virginia Beach. And Deepak, I remember my first, and I should say this, I am not a religious conservative now. I want to put that out there before some of your listeners just click off. I'm not a religious conservative person, but I won the student government presidency, and I remember my first task as student government president was to go to my elementary school principal, Mr. Mazzell, who I was friends with on Facebook until he died recently. But I asked him if he could bring school prayer into our school. And he was so kind about this. He explained to me the First Amendment. He took this meeting with this little 5th grader, and I learned about the separation of church and state in the 5th grade. So I go on, and throughout high school, I did not get involved in student government. We moved a lot. I went to 3 different high schools through high school. So I never really felt like I was entrenched in a high school, like I didn't grow up with these kids. So I never really felt that. But when I went to college, Deepak, I went to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I wrote for the student newspaper, and my job was to cover student government and the UNC system. So I really did get immersed into student government through journalism. And that's what I really thought I was going to go into. I was going to be a journalist. Um, I served on the honor court at UNCG, but in the high school levels, not so much.
Mhm. So, what was your degree in at the UNC?
Yeah, at UNCG, I was a political science major. I spent a lot of time in the communications department. I took a lot of communications classes. I graduated from UNCG in 1994 and then went on to get a master's degree in public affairs after that with a concentration on public policy, and I was allowed to take a lot of courses in the communications department.
Oh, interesting. So, at what point was the switch happen? I mean, like you said, you were interested initially in journalism. So, and then it looks like you switched, very smoothly into public affairs. So, what happened there?
I was, I'm not really proud of this. It was 1994, and I was applying to journalism schools throughout the country. I had applied, I really wanted to go to Temple University and go to their journalism school. And I just did not get in. Now, I had terrible standardized test scores and had a very difficult time getting into graduate school just based on my standardized tests. So one of my first lobbying jobs, Deepak, was to go back to UNCG and say, look, I know my scores are not good, but you guys know me. And they admitted me into the graduate school at UNCG, for which I am eternally grateful. But I think a lot of it was, one, not getting into school. Two, I had read an article in the Atlantic Monthly around this time that was, I guess I was using it as a consolation prize, but I was just, it seems like there was this idea that journalism, as I wanted to be a long form writer, journalism was dying. And so I thought, well, I don't know, let's just bop around politics and see what happens. And so that's the route I went.
Oh, wow. So now if you had to look back and see through the lens of when you were a college student, would you say that was the ideal step for you in your career to get into lobbying, or would you have done it something differently?
Yeah, no, I'm not one to look back and have regrets. Certainly not. I love my job. I get to come to work every day and I get paid to do it. And I get to work on many issues. The one thing I would say that I backed into lobbying was that out of graduate school, I actually didn't go straight into the political world. Now, in between my undergrad and graduate school, I did work on a political campaign. I used to work for former state senator Sandy Sands, who was the rules chairman of the Senate at the time, back in 1994. And I worked for him before going into graduate school. When I left graduate school, my idea was that I was just going to work in the nonprofit sector and that I would maybe go on to be an executive director. I get into the nonprofit sector and I'm a fundraiser. I went to work as a fundraiser, a development director. I worked for legal services. I go on to run this small little nonprofit. I'm an executive director that raises money similar to the way the United Way raises money. I raise money for all these small little organizations that are working in our community. And at the time, this is the late 90s at this point, Deepak, I'm hearing about this surplus that's going on at the General Assembly. Like $1 billion fell out of the sky. A fraction of what we're seeing today, which is like $6 billion falling out of the sky, but there's $1 billion on the table. So I get sent over to the General Assembly to see if we can get a little piece of this pie. And I just fell in love with lobbying. For one thing, it was easier to get an appropriation out of the General Assembly than it was to ask for $25 donations from various individuals. So that is the way I kind of backed into being a lobbyist. Was I started at fundraising and then moved over to lobbying.
Interesting. So if someone who's listening to this and they're wondering as to how to get into, as the first step for getting into lobbying, what would you suggest they should do?
I would say the first step is volunteering or getting an internship, especially if you're young. I know if you're older and you're looking at a career change, that might be impossible. Let's say you have young listeners out there who are in college or in graduate school. The first thing I would do is to get an internship at the General Assembly. There are 900 lobbyists down at the General Assembly, 170 legislators. There is ample opportunity for you to get an internship, get your foot in the door, show that you're a hard worker. You don't even have to, I've seen people go down there, they don't even know how a bill becomes a law when they first step foot in that door. And now I see them in chief of staff roles. I see them as campaign managers. There's this one guy who directs the House Republican caucus, and he is their chief strategist. I remember years ago when he worked at the Apple Store. And so you got to get your foot in the door, and it's a very dynamic place, Deepak. So lots of turnover, especially on staff at the General Assembly. You will find that the person above you or two people above you, they're going to transition out of that role, and it is your opportunity. It is a place where you move up over a short period of time into roles with more responsibility. For those that are looking for a transition from maybe they're looking for a career change, I would say, I know that's a little bit harder going and getting an internship. We all have needs, healthcare and money and all of these things. But there are opportunities for you to engage with interest groups. There are paid fellowships. There are part-time positions. There are things that you can do to be a support. I would say that those two routes are the best routes.
Okay. So if you had jumped back into your career now, so what happened after you graduated? I see that you were a director of development and public relations at Central Carolina Legal Services. So can you tell us a little bit about, how did you get that position and what was it all about?
Yeah, so it was, I had a lot of development positions after that. I kind of bopped around the nonprofit sector, Deepak, and out of graduate school, I had done an internship with Guilford County. And at that internship with Guilford County, I had developed a lot of relationships with nonprofits that basically my project at Guilford County was to develop a program for poor senior citizens that lived in food deserts in Guilford County. We had, batches of senior citizens that were buying their groceries at convenience stores. So, a gallon of milk at a convenience store costs double what it cost at Food Line. So my job was to go into poor communities where we had food deserts and a high concentration of senior citizens that did not have access to transportation. And I was to build a partnership between Guilford County Transportation, the nonprofits that were servicing these elderly clusters of people, and the grocery stores that would benefit from having these seniors come and shop with them once a week, as opposed to the mini marts that were scattered throughout these communities. So this partnership was very unique. It was revenue neutral. We would send a bus to these poor communities, pick up these senior citizens, take them to the grocery stores in exchange for the grocery stores paying for their rides to get there. So it was a win-win situation. The seniors got a place to shop once a week where their dollar goes further. The county is providing a service. We're going to have healthier senior citizens living in these communities. And of course, the private sector is going to benefit because once a week, I'm emptying out a county bus in their parking lot, and they've got new shoppers that they don't have to build stores in other communities. So in that, Deepak, how I got involved with legal services, they serve the poor on domestic violence, housing, consumer fraud. the wide bucket of issues. You have to be in poverty to be a part of this program. And so I got to know legal services. I got to know the Salvation Army. I got to know the United Way. And so as I was working through my internship and given this incredible responsibility to build this revenue neutral program, when it was time for me to apply for this job, which paid $25,000 a year right out of graduate school, which I thought was just amazing, I was picked to lead this effort. And my job was to go around to all the law firms and, pass the hat, give me 2 billable hours so that legal aid can provide these services. In addition to that, I would ask them to volunteer 2 billable hours of their time once a year. And as I raised money for legal services, I got other responsibilities. I was able to go on and work for an organization that fundraises for other organizations, and got to be an executive director. It was quite a ride there for about 2 to 3 years, very dynamic time in my life.
I've also noticed in your career that you were an adjunct professor at the Elon University. Can you tell us what were you teaching there and what was your experience like there?
I taught political science, American government, and public administration. I also taught a course on philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. I'll tell you, my total intention of working at Elon University, which was a great time, and I appreciated every moment I got to be there, which was from, I believe, 2000 to 2008. My intention was to use that money to pay off my student loans. I had accumulated about $25,000 in student debt. Thankful to the taxpayers that subsidized my student loans, the Pell Grants I was able to receive that put me through college, but I had to pay it back. Now, fortunately, I did get a free ride to go to graduate school. Thank you, UNC Greensboro, for that. But my goal was to teach that course, and every month I would literally sign that check over to the College Foundation of North Carolina. I was able to pay back my loans within those 8 years. In the meantime, I got to teach politics to college students. And one of the things that I think they enjoyed the most was that I was, not a trained professor. I don't have my PhD, never really considered myself an academic by any stretch. But I had worked in politics. I was a working lobbyist at the General Assembly. And I was able to take those ideas about separation of powers, about the legislative process, how state government works, local government, federalism, incrementalism, and take it from a theoretical viewpoint and put it in a very practical viewpoint. And to this day, Deepak, I still have former students that I'm friends with on Facebook. It is wonderful to see them flourish. Some of them are in the nonprofit sector, working in the nonprofit sector. Some are working in politics. And it's really just a treat to see the students that were just kids when I was teaching them going on to be leaders. I still get some feedback. I'm sure I was not the best professor in the world, but I do think that every student that left my class had a very good understanding of how government actually works.
And I see after that, you also were a political director at the North Carolina Association of Educators. Can you talk us a little bit about what kind of issues or policies you worked on while you were there?
Yeah, so right prior to working at NCAE, which is the Teachers Association here in North Carolina, I had run a child advocacy organization. And this child advocacy organization ran legislation on behalf of children here in North Carolina. And I had been running a bill every session that just drove NCAE crazy. And it was a bill around suspended students and how we treat suspended students. It was my position, and it still is my position, that if you suspend a kid from school, and you have every right to do that, if they break the rules, they break the rules. But I do believe that child who is a minor still has a right to a public education. And I believe that if you're going to kick these children out, that money, whether it is a fraction of that money, you kick them out December 1st, they still have half their money that you're spending. They should be able to take the rest of that money and go get educated elsewhere. And NCAE had, said that was vouchers and all this, but and they could make the case for this, but I believed that these students needed to be educated, not just sent home. Well, I think NCAE got tired of fighting me, so they hired me. And I was brought on in 2008 to be their lobbyist. I went on to be their political director and chief lobbyist. And my job was to be the face for them down at the General Assembly. I ran their political program. So NCAE is very involved in endorsing candidates from governor, US Senate, all the way down to the county commission and school board level. So my job was to run that program concurrently. I did the political side and I did the lobbying on behalf of teachers. So we wanted better pay, better working conditions, wanted to fight bills like vouchers and things that they saw as a threat to public education.
So now you are at New Frame, where you are the founder and principal. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you see it, because you're a contract lobbyist, how do you see that as being different than working for nonprofit organizations?
Well, it's vastly different. So let me kind of back up again to my NCAE days. NCAE, it was a great experience for me. I, for the first time, had really got to match up my lobbying work with the power of having a PAC and having that tool in your toolkit as you're lobbying. I learned a great deal. I also learned a great deal about myself. I had become over time, while having a PAC as in your toolkit is a good tool to have, oftentimes I feel that nonprofit organizations tend to drift into one political party over the other political party. And so when this became a problem, when the power shifted at the General Assembly from Democrat to Republican, and suddenly NCAE had invested 40 years of investing in Democrats and really did not have any sort of political relationship with the Republican side. Now, they had endorsed candidates here and there. They had endorsed Linda Johnson, or they had endorsed, Mitchell Setzer and Hickory, but I'm talking about true political relationships with the party infrastructure. And if you compare it to what they had with the Democratic Party, you would see what I was saying, which is vastly different. And I felt at my core that public education should be nonpartisan. It should be bipartisan, and that while Republicans certainly bring conservative ideas about public education that I can see NCAE feeling threatened by, I feel like, you have to go with the legislators that the people elected. You've got to figure out, you've got to meet the legislators where they are, not where you want them to be. But Deepak, I found that my philosophy, what I was being asked to do, and I did it well, was not matching up with what was here. Like, I wanted to meet legislators where they were, not where NCAE wanted them to be. And so I decided to leave in 2013. I was actually surfing, Deepak. I was at Wrightsville Beach surfing, and I was just having kind of this Jerry Maguire moment, right? Where he writes the manifesto of everything that's wrong with the company and everything that's wrong with the way he's operating. And I go with these ideas, and my ideas were just not, I felt, accepted. So later that week, I went down to the Secretary of State's office, and I was going to name my company Blue Frame after a wave I had been writing. If you go onto the Secretary of State page, you can see where I took white out and I marked out blue frame because it occurred to me, people are going to think I'm starting some Democratic firm, right? I can't have that. I'm going to be new frame. And so you can see the whiteout on the PDF online. And in May of 2013, I founded New Frame. I continued to work at NCAE through that session. We were still in a short set. No, we were in a long session. And session didn't end until September. In October, I told NCAE that I was leaving the organization. I would stay through the new year. And on January 1, 2014, I opened up a New Frame with 0 clients. And I thought I would be surfing a lot, but there is a vast difference. So the big difference, Deepak, is that when clients come through the door here, and they may be clients that have positive things in front of the General Assembly, maybe they have concerns with where the General Assembly is going, but the way we operate here is we engage the General Assembly the way we feel is going to benefit you. So you might not like legislation down at the General Assembly. Well, we're going to do it by having a conversation with the legislator, with the leadership, with the minority party if we have to, but we're not going to go down there and tell them they're crazy. We're not going to tell them they're bad. When there are issues like firefighters that have issues that are very important, we're going to take that to the leadership and we're going to see, maybe they don't agree with all of your agenda, but they do agree that firefighters should not be dying and living in poverty because they get a diagnosis of cancer. So it's the way we approach legislators. We take on tough issues, but we do it in a way that we think builds, that's based on common ground. Again, we want to meet the legislators where they are, not necessarily where you want them to be.
And in your own words, if you had to define the legislative process in North Carolina, how would you define it?
Slow. Slow. I would define it. Yeah, it is slow, but it's also, there is a clear path. So the process in the General Assembly, I find to be very straightforward. You introduce a bill in a chamber, it goes to a committee, it goes to another committee, it goes to the floor, then it goes to the other chamber and it goes through that process. It's very, there are 10 stops usually that a bill has to take. And that slowness that, it takes weeks, sometimes years. And a part of what I do is help clients get through that process. Now, we can speed it up sometimes by going to legislators and saying, hey, can we move this bill? And that requires, sometimes some very tender conversations. And then sometimes, as we know, some bills move very quick, but the process is the process. And I would say the General Assembly keeps to the process within their rules. And I like the process because I have found, Deepak, even though it is slow, there are multiple stops for every bill. That gives me an opportunity, if it's a good bill, but maybe it has resistance, we can make changes to the bill. It can evolve. If there's a bad bill out there, it gives me more opportunities to affect that bill. So it is a good process. I think by design, it was meant to be slow. When I talk to clients, especially firefighters, I know I'm talking a lot about firefighters. I love what they're doing. These are guys, when they see a fire, they just want to put it out, right? Let's get that thing done. That mindset, while appreciated, doesn't always work in the legislative process. So helping them, or helping the tourism industry, get funding through the budget. It wasn't in the Senate budget, but you'll get it in the House budget. So there's always a step you can take. And so slow, but that's a good thing.
With that, we move into the last segment wherein you get the opportunity to talk anything about yourself. How do you see yourself or your organization moving forward? Or would you like to talk a little bit about your podcast, Do Politics Better? Anything goes.
Well, We love our Do Politics Better podcast. Thank you for listening, and thanks for letting us plug it. It really is an extension of New Frame in how we operate. We have guests who are Democratic legislators. We have Republican legislators, and we try to alternate them week by week. The way we talk to them on the podcast is similar to the way we talk to them in the building. We believe that to get things done in the General Assembly, we want to know how legislators think. What are their priorities? What's their background? What drives them? We want to know where their failures are and what they're trying to get accomplished. So for us to sit down and spend 30 minutes with a legislator to hear about their background, to hear that, hey, you grew up in a trailer, I grew up in a trailer. You're from a single parent home, I'm from a single parent home. It gives us an opportunity to share with listeners what we think they need to know about legislators. So if we read the newspapers and we read what's online, and we tend to make cartoon figures out of legislators, right? This legislator is really great. This legislator is really bad. The fact of the matter, Deepak, is that all legislators are just human beings. And we want to get to know them personally, and we want our listeners to get to know them. So we really think it's an extension of who we are. We're excited about this legislative session. We're knee deep into the House budget process now. The Senate budget just came over. We're excited about where our clients are. We really appreciate legislators who have invited us into their office, even when we have clients that have concerns about their legislation. I do believe this, Deepak, the way we approach legislators by just having a conversation. Look, we might not agree about this, but can you see our point? And I would say without fail, we have been able to positively affect the legislation that is moving through the General Assembly.
Thank you so much, Brian, for taking your wonderful time and spend it with me. Thank you again for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having me, Deepak. Great show. I really appreciate being a guest.
I had fun listening to Brian's story. It was very inspiring. This is the State Lobbying Heroes podcast, and I'm your host, Deepak, signing off until next time.